Hi, Mr. Markson. Thank you for agreeing to interview. Could I start by asking you what did Great Neck used to look like?
Well, um, I have been thinking about this before, and I'm going to kind of the changes really are have a great deal to do with population density, but really as a result of development. There's been a great deal of development, and basically, I first moved to Great Neck in December of 1951 with my parents when I was 13 years old. And at the time, there was only one high school. And when I arrived in January in the high school, the seventh, eighth, and ninth grades, no, I was the last ninth grade for a while. The seventh and eighth grades marched down the hill to what was then the junior high school that opened on Polo Road. Um, so um, there were um, there were still large estates that became apartments. There was an estate at Kensington Gates that hadn't been built up, and the apartments that I think probably that you're aware of uh, at uh, at Kensington Gates weren't there. Um, the um, uh, there was much um, less development in Kings Point. Um, in recent years, big estates have been subdivided. I think in Kenilworth on Shore Road, there's been a great number of houses developed, and the concern about development in Kings Point is that they're on the septic system. They are not connected to the sewers.
Uh huh.
Um, the I'm just trying to think. There's been a tremendous amount of development in um, when what had been the Sperry Gyroscope Company on Marcus Avenue in Lake Success. Um, that the, the main office building of that had served as the Secretariat of the United Nations, um, but there the um, the development was in large office buildings that have doctors' offices, um, and the whole development along New Hyde Park Road there. So all of these things have been um, built up. There have been the trend in recent years has been subdividing properties in other villages, Village of Great Neck, and I think probably you've seen that happen in Great Neck Estates too, where you live.
Yeah.
So um, the um, this um, this puts a a burden on sewage, water, fire, and uh, services in the village, and that's a trend that's happened. But um, if you consider along Baker Hill Road, which had been the Baker Farm and became the schools there, and all of the Baker ranches, which were built at the end of World War II, all of this has been tremendous increase in density of having houses on properties where previously there had been more um, more open land around the houses to allow for water to percolate uh, into the ground system. I think that you know along the coast there have been Well, let's talk about other environmental concerns. There, there, there have been plumes of, I don't know whether you remember when there was a gas station on the corner of Middle Neck and Steamboat Road.
I remember that. I
But
used to live on the steamboat.
yeah, from that gas station there was a plume. I'm not sure whether it was gasoline or what, that went down. I guess it went down under um, uh, Kings Point Park, um, and building. I don't know what caused it. I mean, there was a time that I was walking in Kings Point Park, and there's streams that drain both ways, that drain into Little Neck Bay and to Manhasset Bay, coming off the Great Neck Peninsula. And I smelled in one of the streams clearly what smelled like fuel oil. And I reported it.
Not good.
They were DEC came in and found that somehow in one of the houses there off of Steamboat that there was a fuel oil leak that they had to remediate. I've talked about Sperry gyroscope. This is ecological stuff that goes beyond natural processes. Sperry Gyroscope Company used a cleaning solvent that got into the groundwater and required remediation or closing of some of the wells along there. Dry cleaners on Cuttermill Road had the same sort of problem, that they had to close wells and monitor it, and there was I forget what the dry cleaning fluid they used had leaked under that. There was much lower density building along Cuttermill Road. There was lumber establishments, and all of a sudden there are, office buildings built. Um, uh, the as a matter of fact, the village of Great Neck now just had accepted a report for changing the zoning and increasing density to develop the community. And the village of Great Neck mayor and trustees are going to review that and to see whether developments like another assisted living facility in the town is to be built, and like 4 stories on the corner of Hicks Lane and Middle Neck Road. The question is, what do you do about parking and so on? So this is almost stream of consciousness, and maybe hard to transcribe, but I'm just trying to think of other areas. This is really at the border of. I mentioned the Baker Farm that was completely developed and now is a village hall and a school, and but the other property that was developed that's at the border of the community is along Community Drive in Manhasset there, which became a department store. It started out, what did it start out as? A&S, and they reduced the size of Whitney Pond. I remember when there was natural ice skating on Whitney Pond. The weather has changed. You don't have as good solid ice, but the North Shore University Hospital along Community Drive was added on what still is. There's still a piece of Green Tree Farms along there, and the Water Authority of Great Neck North is pumping water from these areas. Let's see. The natural ecological processes. Some of it's interesting. The park district at Stepping Stone Park lost so much sand in one of the storms that they were talking about having to bring some in, which because they didn't have enough beach to beach the small sailboats or kayaks on, and they hadn't gotten around to that. It required, I think, DEC approval and so forth. And nature had a funny way, and in another storm, the sand was dumped back there, which I kind of felt was a possibility. I mean, it could have gone out again as well, but if you take, I'm reminded of the coastline at Stepping Stone Park. There has been tremendous development along the coastline in Kings Point. For example, adjacent to Stepping Stone Park, there was the George M. Cohan House, and it was an estate. The old house itself got landmark status, but they still built, I think, 3 houses in addition to the landmarked house, and a couple of acre portion was able to be taken by eminent domain and attached to a Stepping Stone Park.
Wow.
I mean, interestingly enough, you can see each year an osprey nest that's right out opposite the Kings Point Park. Stepping Stone Park. Kings Point Park, which is leased from the village of Kings Point, after much lawsuits trying to prevent it happening, they took several acres to make a municipal garage, which had previously been on land close to the Merchant Marine Academy. And in exchange for that, reducing the size of the park. Oh, by the way, there was this development adjacent to the park in what had been the stables of the George M. Cohan property. So several houses were built along Kings Point Road. This is, and the maintenance garage had salt and stuff that was draining into environmentally sensitive areas in the park. But to enable Kings Point Park to make an exchange for parkland, which they, in order to take the acreage for the garage, they condemned some property, or they took by eminent domain, I guess, a property on the shore side of East Shore Road that was owned by the property owners on the opposite side of the road. And, you know, it's going to be like a passive park because you really can't get into it. But let's see, more development. You're too young to remember when there was near Cow Lane, there was a dairy farm where,
Remember that?
yeah, it was not a big property, but when my kids were little, there was a strike, a milk delivery strike, and you used to be able to go there and buy certified milk, which means that it was not pasteurized. It was certified that the the cows were tuberculin tested so that they couldn't pass tuberculosis through milk. And the way it would work is first place, it wasn't homogenized either, so you buy the milk and separate it. But what you do is you go into a shed on the farm property and take your milk out of the refrigerator, leave the money in the cigar box. And I talked to the guy that had the farm at some point, and actually we had the kids there. They had a bull in the barn that at some point they also, the kids were able to see a calf. They were giving them the calf milk from the bucket. I don't know. I'm not sure I remember it right. That might have been the calf that grew into the bull. But the problem that that the owner of the farm, I think it was Minimere Farms, the problem that he had was that he couldn't get kids to do the work on the farm, mucking out the stables and so forth, because as Great Neck became more affluent, there were fewer kids that were willing to do that kind of work at basically low pay. And I don't know, I haven't looked, but I suspect that land became some more houses too.
Where was it and when did it close?
10 years ago at least, and it was the Cow Lane and what is that there? Is that still East Shore Road, or is it whatever it turns into? I could look at a map and try to see. But it was where Cow Lane intersected what I think it's still East Shore Road. Yeah, and Kings Point.
What else did you used to do in Great Neck that you can't do anymore? You talked about the ice skating on Whitney Pond, the cow farm.
Yeah. The house that my parents moved us to in 51 was built on property that had been part of the Grace Estate. And part of that land, actually, my father, I guess, and some neighbors wanted to buy a portion of that because at that point, I don't know whether Thomaston wasn't part of the Park District or Parkwood Pool hadn't been built, but they were talking about building a community pool on land that was on both sides of Colonial Road, and came up, portions of it came up, I guess went down close to the properties that were gardeners, nurseries on East Shore Road. And my father and whoever was in on it had options on the property, and what they did is they added, it fell through. People that were close to where the pool would be built said, well, not in my backyard, too much noise and whatever. Mm-hmm. So they gave up the options, but took land adjacent to increase the size of their properties, the people along Windsor Road and so forth. But so some of that land eventually became the Peninsula Country Club, which the Park District did take over at a certain time, and that is now where the dog park is in Great Neck, and pieces of that land are still being. We were just talking about developing and cleaning up that for use of the parks. Let me just think. When you say what did were we able to do? I'm just trying to think about. I mean, I can talk about. Well, I remember seeing the Frog's Neck Bridge going up, the towers, and actually at the end of a hurricane, the family had a 17-foot outboard cruiser, and we used to do water skiing on the Sound, but the mooring, I guess, got pulled loose, and it ended up what was still the towers for the Frog's Neck Bridge. I am just, there are, I can't think of anything specific. I mean, I was in high school when I came in. I did, after, when I was not quite 17, I did go off to college. I was not in the community all that much. So I'm trying to think of things that we did. I did remember ice skating.
Have there been more hurricanes lately, or more destructive ones? Has that affected the trees at all?
Oh yeah, there was a microburst that took down a lot of trees, which goes back a number of years. You were still here when the microburst came. That took down a tremendous number of trees in Kings Point Park. Sandy did a lot of damage to the parks and knocked a lot of trees down. I think that, for example, if you take a park like Allenwood Park that had a lot of open areas, and I think that I've been involved on the open space, more open spaces in the face of an increasing population. But a park like Allenwood, well, what I say, I described it to a consultant that are talking, doing planning, medium range planning for the park district on what's needed in the future. There is a tension between the recreation facilities that a park district has and the free open space areas. So in a park like Allenwood, where there is a pond there, and there are lawns for people to lie in the sun on, or have picnics on. But some of that, more tennis courts have been built in that time. I think there's a basketball court. There are ball fields on the area too, and all of these things are reducing the amount of area that's just open. I am aware that that there's some concern about, besides for these plumes of pollution, I'm aware that there's some concern about saltwater intrusion in the wells. The peninsula uses well water to supply, and you're talking about an area that's quite close to the shore, and I as I said, the ecological the effect of humans on it is just taking more water out, putting more sewage in, the fish kills that you see around the sound and algae blooms. On Long Island, it's not a particular Great Neck problem, are because too much nitrogen from any number of things, detergents, sewage, and so forth is getting into the water. I'm just trying to think, but as I said, I mean that's what I see, that basically it's getting built up, more higher density housing, and more use of cars, which is a concern. Okay, let me try and see. I've rambled on about this. Let's see the other questions.
I think you answered all of them.
Okay.
Through that. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your times in Great Neck with us.
I'm just trying to think of any other things. I mean, well, again, in terms of space in the community, in the time I've been here, the South School campus was built. And I mean, that's actually not a bad use, because there's some drainage. There was additions to the North School. Anyway, that's some more of the things I was thinking about.
Yeah. Is there anything else?
Not that I can think of at this moment. I just, if there's anything that I said that
already.
What's that?
Those are big changes you've described.
They are big changes, and they're actually, I think, more concerning to me at this time, because, I'll give you another example. I went to high school with the son of the orthodontist that had his office in a house on the corner of Great Neck Road, not Great Neck Road, Old Mill Road and Middle Neck Road. When he and his son were no longer in practice in what was a house with land and rose bushes behind it, and also some land with a stream behind it. When he was no longer in practice, that was sold off, and apartment buildings were built over the higher area. And just recently, a developer has gone to great lengths to open up access to what really there was drainage, or an easement for drainage to the, I think that one drained to the Little Neck Bay, and we picnicked in that area. And now I think 11 or 13 houses are going to be built up in an area which is really, I don't know how, and there were other houses that were built infringing on that land. So there again, ecologically, I mean, this is water flowing through to our natural waterways. So there are ecological problems by development.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And if you think of anything more, please, reach out and let me know.
Okay, will do. I apologize. It was almost stream of consciousness, and I don't know whether you can.
You've given us plenty to think about. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Matt, and lots of luck to you.